that. All right, it looks like we are live. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I didn't mean to press that. There we go. Thanks, everyone, for joining this week's OpenJS Foundation Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is the 10th of September, and this week's meeting is at, 1600 UTC. Do we have anything we want to share or discuss before we get into the agenda?
There is a standards group meeting in just a little bit. For those who are interested in working with us on standards, then you're all are welcome.
Yeah, and I'll also add that we have a standards channel on the Slack, the OpenJS Slack. So feel free to join in there if you're unable to make the meeting later. I'll also remind folks, as Michael added in the chat here, add yourself to the minutes. The Google Doc is there. And this week's meeting is issue 320, which I will also drop into the chat. So yeah, let's get things started. The first item on the agenda is move user feedback survey efforts to the OpenJS Foundation. I removed the label for this one so it doesn't pop back up on the next agenda because I need to have a couple action items on that, and then we can add it back to the agenda. So I'm going to open up a repo and move some things over and such, but we'll bring that back up at a later date. So moving on, unless anyone wants to discuss that any further. The next item is pull request 309. This is incubating projects must have a champion. And if I remember correctly, and I'll also share in the chat the link to last week's minutes, I believe that the expectation was that we would discuss this further in the issue, which it does not seem like there has been any discussion further in the issue. So do we, I think we have something of a light agenda today. Do we want to discuss this any further in the meeting here, or do we want to just kick it back to the issue?
I think it probably is worth discussing if we have time, just because I would imagine that if there's not been a lot of discussion in the issue, it's just maybe people haven't had time to consider the different viewpoints.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like we don't have Miles on, but I'll try to summarize here to get people up to speed.
Would it make sense to go through the rest of the items and then come back to it?
Yeah.
It's just easy.
That's a good idea.
Yes, easily using up all the time and then.
Yeah.
The other thing,
yeah, that makes sense.
It would be good to keep, I think, like 10 minutes for a private section as well, just to touch base on applications.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Time box things.
If I miss either of those two, just remind me. Great. Okay, so yeah, we'll move on and we'll come back to those. The next item is, this is issue 296, specify the scope of CPC votes during application and incubation. I believe that, and I'm looking at the notes from last week, that Miles was going to draft a PR to add some guidance to some of this, or does he have one here? Hang on. What is that? Poll 294. Pull request 294 was merged. Rename acceptance criteria to graduation criteria. Yeah, I'm just kind of going back through last week's notes. it seems like we need to add more guidance around this in the documentation.
Yeah, I think I don't think there needs to be a vote, but I think some clear step needs to happen. Like we probably need the go no go from the project itself, right? Like, hey, we've discussed these things and there's no outstanding issues, so they're still ready. And then we need something like at least a no objections last call or something like that. I personally think anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So adding that to the doc.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it seems like there are a couple of areas where we might need a little more clarity, which is, understandable as we start to work through this process. That I think Sendil opened a PR. Let me see if that's part of the agenda as well. Oh yeah, let me see. Issue 295, which is next on the agenda, is similar. Commit to providing a reply to an application within a specific time frame. I feel like I just looked at a closed PR or two that was adding more guidance around this stuff as well. It looks like Miles has a PR open, which he opened last week. I'll drop this in. This is pull request 319, which may touch on some of this. This is regarding expectations for dissent or objections in the member expectations. So is this during, sorry, I'm trying to get up this.
I think that's more just basically saying in general, expose, voice your objections early.
Mm-hmm.
It came out of this discussion, but it's more of just a general guidance of saying, don't wait till the end, right?
Yeah, although he says this will, in the description, it says it'll close issue 296, which is specify the scope of CPC votes during application and incubation. But I'm not sure that that's accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, or at the very least, maybe it needs to be spelled out a little more clearly in the expectations and project progression.
Exactly. I think technically it could close that in that, nothing says there is a vote, but I think this sort of the step to say we're done, we could do with documenting better for sure.
Right, because I think that's one of the hangups right now. We want to kind of treat everybody. Right. Yeah.
So maybe I'll volunteer to take the action to PR that in, unless anybody else wants to do it. And, part of when we discuss the current applications, I think we can discuss a little bit around that too, what those checkpoints, what should it be? And I can capture that.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind, Michael, that'd be great. And I think last week I was having some audio problems, so let me know if people are hearing themselves duplicate because of my audio connection. Sorry, I'll also mute when I scold my puppy. So I see, let me promote Evan here as well. Okay, so Michael, if you'll PR something that will directly address this issue 296, that would be great. And perhaps we need to just make sure we're capturing anything that needs to be clarified in the project progression, which takes me to the next issue, which is 295. Commit to providing a reply to an application within a specific time frame. And looking back at the notes last week, I think we got some progress on this because based on a bunch of emails that are in my inbox, Brian has worked on email lists for the CPC and voting members and such.
That came out of a different discussion.
Is that right?
Yeah, like that, if I'm thinking in the right context, I was asking if we had an email list that we could get to all the CPC members. And I think we just had one which got to the voting members. And I think we discussed this before, and it was like, well, we didn't really have anything private to discuss among the CPC members, but in terms of the applications, I think we do, right? And so I wanted to like send some follow-on emails to just the CPC, and it was like, well, we don't actually have any mailing list. So Brian suggested those tweaks to the mailing lists.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that might have been the work because of the last notes here. But I think maybe one of the questions that came out of the last conversation was, should the application be a forward only, or should it include the applicant in the correspondence?
Right, that was the discussion last time, yes.
Yeah. So based on the notes here and what I remember last week, it doesn't seem like we landed on this one either.
What I remember in terms of the time frame is, in some of the issues, I can't remember where now, is that I think we had consensus that if we committed to, and it might have been in the discussion last week with Toby as well, and if he's here, he can correct me, but was that if we committed to not a yes, not the final response, but to communicate on a regular basis, like basically you'll get at least a hello, thank you, we have your application within a certain time frame, and then we will update you at this interval. That was reasonable.
Yeah, I remember that. Do we want to decide what that looks like right now as a starting point, and then PR that in and move from there?
That sounds good to me.
I mean, again, we are, only 18 minutes into the meeting. We're kind of at the last sort of agenda item, so we could talk about these two things. We do have the post-bootstrap project board that we could look at as well, which, if I remember correctly, is primarily the code of conduct progression work. So I would prefer to kind of.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, I suspect this one will take too long. So.
Yeah, and Manil's not on the call, so I don't know if we want to really, I don't know if we have really much of an update on the COC stuff. My inclination is to just kind of get something figured out for at least one of these two issues to move forward.
I do have a bit of an update on the COC one, but I think let's do these ones first, and then I'm happy to come back to that if we have time.
Okay. I think that committing to provide a reply is something that we can just kind of discuss briefly and land on something. So maybe we should start there.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. We discussed last week that perhaps someone from like either Brian or Jory or someone from the foundation would maybe give an initial response that basically your application has been accepted or not accepted. We've received your application, and someone will get back to you in a specified time frame, and then it'll be kind of ongoing from there. I don't know if we want to lay out any expected timeline per se, but at least an assurance of regular communications.
I just written down as a starting point, like, initial response within 1 day, and that could be like foundation staff, Brian or Jory, like you said, and then updates at least every week.
1 day short? Should we just make, give it a week? I think people.
I don't think it's like, and I think as long as there's, foundation staff support from program management, it's not too much to ask. And it's a very lovely thing to be able to reply back to somebody inside 24 hours and just say, hi, I see you and we have this and, we appreciate it. I think that makes people feel really good. I'd love for us to commit to that. I think it's great.
Is there any way to automate that?
I'm sure
Well, does automating it,
but
I was just going to say, does that take away from what Jory's describing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could do an automated, like, hi, this is an automated thing to let you know that your email was successfully sent. But that's sort of maybe a little different from, hi, I'm a human being, and
Right.
you know, somebody has actually read this. Somebody with eyeballs.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Maybe both.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, because it's sort of nice to know that you got the right email or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I agree the second one, but it's sort of like if you have the first one, you might relax the second one to be like 2 or 3 days or something. But I don't know.
Yeah.
If you think we can commit to a day, we can start with that and then, see if it's.
Here's what I propose. Why don't we do the auto response and then commit to 48 hours, but strive for 24 hours?
You said 48 hours?
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people are away or I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So commit to 48 and strive for 24. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I don't know how if we want to have that in the documentation. I guess yeah. I mean that's aspirational. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds good.
And then what do we say beyond that?
I think at least a once a week update is reasonable.
Okay. Do we want to, and maybe this is a later edition. Teddy, get in here. Do we want to? Sorry, he's very mischievous. Do we want to mention a mentor or a champion at this point and say, you can expect regular, or do we just want to wait until we sort that out and then PR that in against whatever we get here?
That might make sense to wait until we have consensus on the mentor side. It might slow down getting this in.
Okay, that sounds good. Do we need to commit to any further communication? Or do we think that just this kind of bit that we have here is good enough for a start?
Well, I think if we were trying to think about designing like what's essentially a customer service response, right? We're saying we're going to get back to these folks in a certain period of time. We're going to, and then that communication should be about, we have this, we've seen it, and here's what's happening next. I think we were talking about committing to some schedule of like not letting too many days go by. And I think that's what we're saying is like, we will try and make sure that we're touching base with you, every 5 business days until your project application has concluded, the process is concluded or something like that. And I don't think that that's too much to ask, but.
Yeah, that's like, I think we didn't have consensus on like saying, hey, the whole thing's going to be done in a certain time, but I do think we had consensus that, a regular update was what we should be doing, committing to at this point.
Yeah.
So here I can just paste what I've got in the notes into the chat. If that looks good to people or not.
Yep, looks good to me.
Looks good to me as well.
Yeah.
So we just need a volunteer to PR that in. I guess I could do that as part of a PR to because this should go into the progression document. Probably the same. Is it the same one that I already volunteered to update?
I think so. I think it would be great to put this in the progression document because that's what folks are reading anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can.
Michael, you want to talk about, go over language at all later? Just let me know.
Sure.
All right, great. So that's specifying the time frame stuff. What about, was the other one, the champions and mentors? Do we want to discuss that?
Sounds good.
So correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe this is only one viewpoint, but were we discussing perhaps a champion being someone early on that would begin the process with a project who is applying, and a mentor, so these would be two different roles, and mentors would be folks from within the foundation that would help them through the ins and outs of the process per se. And part of the champion role would be that essentially if nobody was willing to step up to champion the project, then it's a little bit of a barometer for whether we should take in this project. Do we want both roles? How would we clarify each of the roles? What are people's thoughts about this in terms of a new project coming on?
I mean, I do really like the idea of having people from the CPC community who are designated as like mentors, or and we had that in the former JS Foundation. There were certain folks who were mentors to projects. I think that is slightly different though from having somebody who's kind of helping to ensure that the process is administered and completed. I think mentoring a project and overseeing the process to completion are two different things. And I don't know to what extent we want to, get super specific about it. But I think when Miles and I were first talking about this idea of a champion, it was mostly to ensure that a ball didn't get dropped and that the process does resolve for projects, that we're not leaving projects in some limbo.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like that role is needed.
I'm wondering if mentor is the right word. Like I could see, and I don't know what the right word is, but it's kind of like it's more of a process help, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not strictly, well, it could be, but it's like I think what I've heard described is more about let's make sure that the process moves forward and the bits that need to get happen. I'm not sure that necessarily includes also mentoring to say, here's how you get through the different pieces. It could, but like it could be
I could
manager or something, right?
Yeah, like a process chaperone or something.
Yeah, and the champion is like it's like, yeah, think this is a great project to enter, and I'll advocate on behalf of that. And then the other one is like, okay, there's these process things. The people who understand that really well can help them get through those process things.
Mm-hmm.
A mentor could even be something different, but then that's a whole, I'm just thinking like in terms of what you're committing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like mentoring actually is probably significant more work than just being the process chaperone or whatever, the application manager or whatever.
Yeah, and maybe maybe we don't want to say we're going to commit to providing mentors right off the bat. Maybe it is just process chaperoning, and then as a result of getting our first few projects through this process, we learn what kind of support they would appreciate, maybe in the form of additional help or mentorship or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense to me. And you could have like multiple mentors, right? But they may be more on request versus the application manager who's kind of like, okay, this has been waiting, have we finished this off yet, or is it moving forward, that kind of things.
Yeah.
If I may, Michael and Jory and I are talking a lot. Does anyone else have any input? I see, like Timmy, for example, Wilson, commented on the silent period, which maybe we should also come back to, just get clarity on that. But does anyone else have any input on what this should look like in terms of champions and mentors? No? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that, voices are being heard and thoughts shared and such.
Take my silence as approval. Everything sounds pretty good to me.
Okay, great.
I think
all right.
we could bike shed the name for, what I've got in the notes now is champion and application manager. We can probably bike shed the names. I think the key thing that seemed to be contentious was, if we can't find a champion, what happens?
Yeah, which I think brings us back to the conversation too of like, what should in terms of accepting new projects, what should our default state should be? Should it be yes? Should it be no? Should it be, maybe this is opening up to a much larger conversation, but I think that if, like Miles had said in previous conversations, if nobody's willing to step up and champion the project, then perhaps it isn't a fit, or at least not at this time.
I'm like I don't think this needs to be a forever statement, but I think to start with, that works. I think that makes sense to me. I think we need to start with ones we think are a good fit, and we need to learn as we go through the first few. And, I think saying that for the first few that come in, we need to have a champion makes total sense to me. It doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have to be that way forever. But personally, I think for the first couple, at least, it really is going to be important.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree as well.
Do we need to put that in writing in the documentation? Or is that just kind of understood?
Well, I think we should try and, because there's an issue, I can't remember what issue it is, but there is an issue which I think the one that Miles opened around a champion. We need to maybe comment in there that says, this is the discussion we had in the CPC meeting. This is what we'd like to go, the group who was there would like to do this going forward, but I don't think the person who was advocating on for some of the other options is here. So we need to give them the option to sort of engage and basically hear that and have some more discussion before we decide that we finished on that front, I think.
That sounds fair.
So comment, next action, I'll just take in the notes here. Next action is to comment on issue which discussing that group present felt that at least for the first few, we need to to require a champion.
Can I ask, maybe I'm not finding it, but I was looking for a list of what would be expected of the champion, and I don't see that.
We don't, that's one of the things that we would need to create. That's something we've been talking about. Yeah, that's a solid point.
So why don't we, if we want to spend a few minutes, we could do that now too, to say.
Yeah.
So we could say, like, it's my starting point would be like advocate on behalf of the project, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think would, yeah, advocacy, but in the form of like probably regularly checking in and, you know, making sure that their questions are being addressed. And
so maybe the first thing would be that weekly communication, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
I would push back a little bit on weekly, but you know, bi-weekly, monthly, depends on the project, I'm sure.
Sorry, I don't know if it's just me, but you're very, very faint.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think my headphones were weird positionally. I just said I would push back a little bit on weekly. You know, I would say that I'm probably here as a champion, right? Even though we're not applying or whatever Express isn't, but I think that's sort of the role I've maybe been taking, and I feel pretty comfortable just showing up randomly. And I don't know if a lot of other maintainers are going to be able to devote more time if they're in the incubator, like that. You know, that is obviously more involved. But it seems to me like setting that requirement might turn away some people who are like, well, I think I do, but I'm not sure. So.
But this is only for the, like, when a project applies to join. We talked earlier about giving them an update, saying, you know, okay, here's an update on your application, right? And that could just be, yeah, we're still discussing it.
Right. I just meant. Like if that process, checking in weekly, the process might not change weekly, right? And there might not be something to talk about weekly. So saying weekly seems a little bit aggressive when it could just be when necessary, I guess was my point.
Well,
right?
So just to be clear, Wes, I think that I want to make sure, especially from, you know, where you're coming from, there would be a champion on the CPC side and perhaps a lead person on the project side, right? So this champion would only be responsible for that weekly correspondence that we agreed to previously that would come from the CPC during an application process, that we would just want to keep the lines of communication open. Even if there is no update, you would expect to hear from us on a regular basis.
I think I maybe misunderstood then, champion. I assumed that was coming from the project side.
No.
I guess maybe I misread that. Okay.
No, this is that, like, the project applies and it's giving feedback to the project, and it's a champion in the CPC to say, yeah, sorry, we're still talking about it. So there's not like dead air for a long period of time.
Totally. I'm so sorry. I misunderstood that. Maybe the documentation should be a little bit more clear then, so that because I was doing this based off of reading this edition. So my bad. Sorry.
All right, CPC champion.
Well, it already says CPC champion, but that is a little bit misleading, right? Because if they're applying to be on the CPC, then it sounds like maybe that means the person who's trying to push for joining the CPC, right? So like member of the CPC who's willing to champion or something like that might have made it more clear to me.
Application champion? I don't know.
Yeah, now that you explained it, I understand why you worded it that way, and it makes sense. But coming in, it definitely didn't.
Okay. Well, yeah, if we PR in some text, we can clarify that. And maybe it's like application champion and application manager are the two roles, because they're all related to right.
And maybe if we identify, like, in the documentation here, like, you know, that a project would have a point person, then it would like clarify the distinction between the two roles. But it does raise another question around the champion. Does it need to be a CPC member? Can it be someone that's not a member? I assume it should be a member, but I just want to raise that as a question.
I think it should be, you know, a regular member, somebody who has some plausible accountability, you know, to the group would be ideal.
Agreed.
Yep.
But that should maybe be, I don't know if that's in the documentation as well, just to be clear.
Well, I'm just writing in our minutes these things. I don't think it's anywhere yet, so we can PR something in based on minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
So what I've written down so far for the requirements is provide weekly update on progress, be available to answer questions from the project, advocate on behalf of the project.
Do we need to be clearer about advocate on behalf of the project, what that means? Or perhaps use a different word? I'm not sure.
I mean, is it like help to explain? I can write it. I'm writing stuff underneath it to help to explain why the project is a good fit. Thinking what other concrete things under terms of advocating. It's kind of like they should be somebody who's like, yep, this is a good fit, and I'm, you know, willing to help convince the rest of the CPC that that's the case.
Yeah, perhaps someone that has like familiarity with the project and its community. I'm not sure, and someone who would prevent the process from stalling.
Yeah, I wonder, like the stalling part, it's kind of like, how does that overlap with the application manager? Well,
with the application manager, yeah, I mean, I guess manager implies that they would be on top of that. I wondered about, you know.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna, the thing I could add there was like, help the application manager when needed. So the application manager is like trying to get this through the process and making sure it doesn't stall. But the champion would be the person on the CPC that they would go to if there are problems that need help working through.
Yeah, so I guess one clarity might be, I'm sorry, it was someone else?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Would the application manager, would that be more of an active role or a passive role, in the sense of, is that a resource that the project could use to get through the process, or is it like someone who is actively working to move the project along?
I would have said the latter.
Yeah, same.
Okay.
You know, and that's where I think we had in mind that, you know, that might be somebody from the foundation like Brian or Jory, right? We would.
Okay. Maybe that would be good to have clear as well, that they would be actively working to progress the project through the process. Just so there's no.
Yeah, what I wrote was ensures progress through the process, helps project understand and move through the progress through this process steps.
Great.
Do you want me to do, like, I could add actively to the beginning of that, or?
No, I think it makes sense how you.
Okay.
Based on what you have, Michael, thanks, Matteo, too, by the way. I know you got to drop. Do you think you have enough there to? Bye, Matteo. Do you think you have enough there to PR some language in, or?
Yep.
I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, it's all in the same area, so I think I can take something. We may, you know, and we should have more discussion in GitHub on it anyway. But I think there'll be enough there to get comments flowing and stuff. So.
Okay, great.
Like I'll take the starting point that we in the PR that says, you know, we'll need to have a champion who will do these things. Otherwise, I don't think it needs to be a no, but I think it means that, like, we won't say yes yet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I'll start with something like that, and I'm sure there'll be that'll trigger some discussion. So.
Also, if you're taking these notes in the minutes,
yep.
Michael, this is a good opportunity for anyone else too, if they want to step up and take those notes and transform them into a PR. We're happy to have more people committing and opening up issues and pull with us.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody wants to take the first cut at any one of these, feel free.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, let us know, or one of us will move on it as well. But happy to have the help and the participation. Okay, great. So do we think that covers those two areas that we were looking to discuss further? And if so, sorry, go ahead, George.
No, I was just saying that I think this all sounds really good. I'm excited to, work on in a way that's like very, service oriented toward our maintainers and our communities, and that's it.
Yeah, agreed. Do we want to move on to anything else, or do we want to call it a wrap and go to a private session at this point?
I think the one thing I would call out on the code of conduct side is just that I did submit I haven't had a chance to see if there's any comments on that, but I submitted a pretty significant update. So, if people have time to go take a look and review and comment on that, that would be good.
Okay, great. And is that in the Manil's PR, or is that elsewhere? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
I talked to Manil and he said, just go ahead and push directly to that PR. So I accepted some of the outstanding comments and then pushed, basically went into edit and edited significantly.
Okay, great.
I have a few comments to look at too, but basically that's the next step. I think people looking at it, in my mind, at least it lines it up with what the text was in the other side, like the existing doc that we started with.
Great. Just making notes myself to look at Michael's updates to Manil's COC PR. Great. Thank you. Is there, another thing that we haven't touched on this meeting yet? Is there any sort of updates from the board? Chris is on. Michael, you're on.
I don't have anything that comes to mind. Chris, anything on your side?
I don't think so. No, no.
Okay.
Nothing's coming to mind right now.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure we didn't.
We can let's look at the project board, which is not a bad idea. I don't see. So the substitute maintainers governing body, I'd have to go back to check to see if we've landed that one. Actually, let's see.
I feel like that one landed because that was just waiting on the procedural stuff and you guys.
Yeah, although I'm looking at it, the thing doesn't say closed as far as I can tell. So sorry, I'm just going to the pull request to see. Oh, yeah, it's merged. Okay, so that one we can just move off the board. Perfect, so that's complete. Okay, so that's the only thing that wasn't in a complete state already, so I think we're good.
All right, great. And that brings us to right about 10 minutes till, so maybe we'll drop things off and go to the private session. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, anyone who's not a voting member or regular members as well can stay, is that correct?
That's right.
Yep.
So anybody who's not a voting member or a regular member, please drop off. I will stop the live stream. But thanks everyone for joining, and we'll go to a private session.